Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's edition of the Lashing Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. My name is Jared Kruger, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Kevin Quigley. Kevin, we had weekends on opposite ends of the country. Essentially, I was in the South. You were in Beaver Stadium for the whiteout. I was at TCU for a purple out, is what they were describing it, but it wasn't quite a lot of purple. Though that seemed to be the color that you like to rock against. Or when you made your first impression on the press box.
Yeah, I was so focused on don't wear blue, don't wear white. I go into my closet Saturday morning because I drove up to Pennsylvania Saturday morning, grabbed that purple Q-zip out of my closet, thought nothing about it, about who the opponent was, what color they wear. I pull into the parking lot at Beaver Stadium and I go, son of a gun, used a different word when I realized this. I'm wearing purple, which happens to be the color of the opponent. So, didn't feel bad. I had a black jacket on, black polo underneath. I kind of hid the purple pretty well. The Washington folks were in full Washington kits in the press box, which was unique to me. But yeah, it was a choice, a faux pas on my part. But you got to be stylish. I look good in purple. I stand
That
by
was
it.
and so I just don't like wearing color purple. It's obviously a rival school from back here's colors, so I try to avoid wearing purple at all costs. So I'm at TCU, and I'm wearing black with a little bit of purple on it. I got a shirt at the bookstore before the game. I was at the TCU Oklahoma State game, and if you ever have the opportunity to imagine life where Penn State is miserable, Oklahoma State is in that situation right now. TCU went from the playoff in 2023 to kind of middle of the road in the Big 12. So I mean, there's so it puts in perspective how good Penn State has it right now, and that's kind of crazy to me. But it was different to watch a game. It was just a different atmosphere. We ended up parking in a church parking lot for a free shuttle, which was really cool. Went to the stadium. They just a typical stadium experience. It wasn't an overabundance of tailgating. It's not anything quite like what you would see in Happy Valley or University Park, but it was still a cool atmosphere, a good place to watch a football game. And TCU wore their incredible chrome helmets. And one of the things that I think really caught my eye was that their mascot, the Super Frog, had his own hype video and his own entrance video, and then stood at midfield and welcomed the team. And it was something I'm not ever used to, but it was different. And I think that's the cool thing is going different places around the country that, it's a much different atmosphere than many expect.
Yeah, and it's no secret I went to Clemson. I also went to Penn State. And like Clemson is a completely different vibe from what you've described in Texas to what Beaver Stadium is on any given Saturday. So, yeah, the love of college football is there across all the country, and everyone just has their own flavor. I do want to shout out. I did have a very gracious host on Saturday. I got up there a little well before the game, and I did have a very gracious host in the parking lots for a tailgate. So you know who you are. You listen to the podcast. It's one of our avid listeners. So thank you for hosting me. It was fantastic. But yeah, back to the whiteout, man. Like, what an experience, first game day for me. And they go 28-0 in the first half. 4 drives, 4 touchdowns. You and I talked in the pregame a week ago now. It's Penn State was 3-5 against the spread going into that game, right? And you and I both agreed that they don't have the style points. Penn State does not have maybe justification for their ranking. Their strength of schedule is like 30th in the country. It's been hovering in the mid-20s, into the low 30s. But nothing Penn State has done besides putting wins in the win column has really blown people away. And then you go out on defense to start the game, kind of a ho-hum drive. You hold Washington to a field goal attempt. They miss it. and then you put the ball in your offense's hands 4 times. You go 4 touchdowns, and it was just a statement. And the second half is the second half. It was weird. It was quirky. There was a kick return for touchdown to start the second half that shouldn't have been called back, that gets called back, and just a lot of weird things going on. A Tyler Warren fumble, which is just not what usually happens. Spread was 14, and they win by 29. That's a statement, right? They went out, they took care of business.
That's exactly what they needed to do. I know we've talked about this. We're going to talk about this a little bit here in the second segment when we talk about where Penn State should be ranked compared to some of their foes. Penn State's got to you got to put up the style points. And, that's the most important thing right now. Every game, the next 3 games, you've got Purdue at Minnesota and home against Maryland. You've got to be able to take care of business and take care of business in style. If they're able to do that, then Beaver Stadium is going to host a college football playoff game. It's that simple, and that's what needs to happen. But they did that against Washington. They came out, they ran Tyler Warren at the goal line. Go figure, that might work sometimes. But it's just one of those situations where now they know what they need to do to win against elite teams, and Ohio State. The next 3 games are I don't want to say overly difficult, but they could be some speed bumps in the road to where they want to go if they let it get to them. The good news is the playoff isn't until December 21st, because I highly doubt if they host a home playoff game that it's going to be on a Friday. That would be a logistical nightmare in Beaver Stadium, much like noon games are. But hey, who doesn't love a noon game, Joel Klatt? And so if they're able to do that against Purdue, which they've got coming up, Purdue is not the Purdue that we've seen in years past. The tricky one is probably Minnesota. PJ Fleck and James Franklin are very similar as far as coaching styles and the way things go. Obviously, like James Franklin's want-to-know mentality, unrivaled, whatever. It's not quite the same as ski ma, row the boat, or whatever, but very similar. And then you've got Maryland to wrap it up at home in a rivalry that's not a rivalry. And then it's the off-season, not the off-season, but bull prep or playoff prep, if you will, I guess, is the way to put it for Penn State this year. So, I mean, not a lot should change, but Penn State's just got to stay focused on the task at hand.
Yeah, they certainly do. And shout out to Andy Kotelnicki for making the adjustments. Tyler Warren, ball first and goal from the 2-yard line, and they go in the Warren Cat. He heard all week long of why the heck did you not do that against Ohio State. I even was quite cynical on Twitter after the Tyler Warren score of, hey, Warren Cat touchdown from the 2-yard line. That's probably a week and a few hours too late on that one. But they went to it twice. Bo Perbula had a good game. Nick Singleton was bought in. He had a fantastic lead block on the Bo Perbula touchdown run. Kind of met the defender straight on, and then I don't know if Bo had a word, like a hot word or whatever. Nick turns the defender outside, and Bo cuts upfield. But like the play was just perfectly set up. Offensive line was doing what they wanted to. Penn State seemed to be able to do anything they wanted to on offense, and then the defense, man. I turned to Joe in the press box. It was like, this feels. It was early in the game too. I was like, this feels like a Manny Diaz defense. Every defensive lineman was 2 to 3 yards in the backfield on every snap. Like Penn State was playing from the Washington backfield, and until they took Will Rogers out and put Williams Jr. in, like Washington's offense had nothing after that first drive. And it was very refreshing to see. They pinned their ears back. They got after the quarterback, and they just couldn't do anything. And the quarterback Williams Jr. runs for 3.8 yards a carry. Jonah Coleman and Muhammad 2.2 and 2.5 yards per carry. Like just an all out smackdown, beatdown, and just a lot of style. And it gives like a lot of validation to some of the games that Penn State hasn't dominated on the scoreboard. It gives validation. It's like, nah, man, they are really dominating these games, and this they finally put one together.
And that's exactly what they needed to do. They needed a big win, and they needed a dominant win against a team that, like Washington, probably is going to find their way into a bowl game, but they still needed to win big, and they needed to do that. They need to do that and more against Purdue, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more when we come back here for the second segment of the Lasching Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. Welcome back to the Lasching Out Podcast, Nittany Sports Now Network. He's Kevin. I'm Jared. Kevin, it's Purdue. Again, it's not an overly big matchup like we've seen in years past. Obviously, they started the season there a couple years ago, and it was much more hyped than this. But now it's just a very much ho-hum kind of deal. They're off to West Lafayette, Indiana. It's a 3:30 kick, which is probably solid. They got 2 3:30 kicks here coming up between Purdue and Minnesota, which is nice to see. But again, Purdue football is not where it should be or where it needs to be. They're number 18 in the Big Ten, and life's not really good for the Boilermakers.
No, they're on 8 straight losses. They're 1-8 this season. Their only win is against FCS Indiana State. So they still do not have an FBS win this year. Penn State's a 28.5 point favorite. Over under for this game is pretty high. I think it's like 50.5, which is lofty. Not sure what the wind's going to be doing in West Lafayette on Saturday, but if it's not windy, temps look to be pretty mild, 56. Like, yeah, only 7 miles an hour wind forecasted for Saturday. So over under is 50.5. Ohio State put up 49 on them last week, 45 on them last week. If you're Penn State, you've got to put up another 35, 40 points here. Get Bo to play probably the entire fourth quarter. Get out of this game healthy with a win. I am interested to see if Nick Singleton's availability. Joe and I had it, and it was kind of just flowing around the press box on Saturday that like Nick Singleton wasn't on the sideline for the last 9 minutes of the fourth quarter. No, it was not made available for post-game media availability. So, if this team is going to need him for the playoff, do they need him for Purdue this week? No, probably not. But going forward, his long-term health is probably very key to the success of Penn State's team.
Absolutely, and I think that's the thing. Against Washington, they didn't need him there at the end. He did practice Wednesday, or was seen during the visible practice window for the media, which is good. But going back to Purdue, they scored 7 points against Notre Dame, 21 points against Oregon State, 10 against Nebraska, 6 against Wisconsin. They got up. They almost took down Illinois. It was 50-49. They got shut out against Oregon. They scored 20 against Northwestern, shut out against Ohio State. Penn State needs to shut Purdue out. Everybody's talking about that litmus test, right? Strength of schedule, common opponents. What makes Penn State better than, say, a Georgia team, other than the fact that they have not lost more than once. And their one loss is to number 4 at the time, for Ohio State. You're missed by a touchdown. Ohio State is the number 2 team in the country. And who is Ohio State lost to? The number 1 team in the country. And they're only a player or 2 away from being undefeated, and those roles being flipped. So for me, Penn State's got to shut out Oregon, or I'm sorry, not shut out Oregon, but shut out Purdue. And if they're able to do that, they need to put up some serious points. They need to be at or above that 35 to 45 point region. For Ohio State, you want to look at again, common denominators here as we talk about the playoff and where Penn State's ranked. Penn State's ranked number 4 right now. You've got Ohio State, at 2. You've got Oregon at number 1, and you've got Indiana behind you at number 5. So I mean, it's 4 teams in the top 5 that are Big Ten opponents. Then you looking at kind of the similarities between some of the schools here. You go to that Notre Dame game, that 66-7 game, and I think if I'm James Franklin and I'm Penn State, I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking we need to score as many points as that, or just flat out dominate in a way like Notre Dame did, and in that way you have that little common denominator. Oh well, they beat up on Purdue this much. They beat up on this team this much, and I think that makes things a little bit simpler for them, with the way things are trending towards the end of the year.
Yeah, and it needs to be another. Washington only had 193 yards, and without Damon Williams Jr. coming into the game, who even after the game, Kobe King, because Abdul Carter, after Damon got in at halftime, Abdul Carter took like a couple bad angles early on Damon, and it was just like, man, is this guy like really that fast? And I saw downfield, we're down on the field for the last 5 minutes of the game, and like seeing Damon Williams Jr. in the backfield, he was small. Kobe King was like, yeah, he was a lot smaller than we thought he was. I think he's listed at 5'11". 5'11 is generous with cleats on concrete with a helmet on. But he was also the fastest player on the field for Washington's offense. So, but anyways, they put in that X factor at quarterback. He's still only 6 of 10 passing, 10 rushes for 38 yards. Washington only has 193 yards for the game. It needs to be 193 yards is the ceiling for this Purdue offense. And the pass rushers need to have another good game. Abdul Carter had his best game. I think he was a 95 grade on pass rush on PFF. Tackling was a little iffy, but Abdul Carter was in the backfield so fast against Washington that he really didn't even have time to analyze and line up tackles. And then Penn State was building defensive depth on the back end. Kind of my secondary player of the game on the defense. Obviously, that's going to go to Abdul Carter and Kobe King. But Davian Collins had a breakout game against Washington. Would love to see that continue. 13 snaps this week, 5 tackles, including a sack. Probably shouldn't have an interception on a pass that I think eventually was ruled a completion for Washington. Kind of a mutual catch. Davian rips the ball from the Washington player, falls to the ground with the ball in his arms, and then the offensive player goes and fights for it again. I want to say that ended up going for a catch. For Washington, I can't really remember. It's been 4 days now, but what a way to make up your opportunity, because if you had told me he had played 25 or 30 snaps, I was like, yeah, that checks out. But he only played 13. And if you're a guy who's fighting Cam Miller for the third cornerback, or Zion Tracy as the third or fourth cornerback that's going to get the field in nickel and dime situations, if you make that kind of impact in 13 snaps, like, that just shows you. That's probably his first or second game action this year. Redshirt sophomore transfers in. They give him an opportunity early in the game, and it seemed like often, but obviously not very often. And he was just out there making play after play, and it was just awesome to see. And then on the offensive side, Corey Smith, he had that big long 78-yard touch. He didn't end up not making the end zone. They found him the ball trying to get into the end zone. But if Nick Singleton's not a go, and maybe they hold Nick Singleton back just for precautionary reasons, Corey Smith has shown that he can be that home run hitter that Nick Singleton has been the last 2 or 3 years. And now that's just, it adds another layer, adds another level of depth. It adds more players on film that teams have to now consider. And Corey Smith, I don't know if he's faster than Nick Singleton, but he was hitting holes hard. And that run he broke free was just, it was awesome to see. So we talked in the pregame, guys building depth, making the most of their opportunities. We're not really worried about red shirts this late in the season. It's good to see that guys that have been itching to get on the field did make an impact on Saturday.
Right. You mentioned the red shirts, and I want to touch on that before I talk about the rankings. They are currently at, if they have played in one or more games, or one game or less, they would be good to finish the season out playing the next 3 games. Obviously, it gets trickier if they played in 2 or 3. Obviously, the limit is 4. But then bowl season, playoff season, does not count against that. So this is a great opportunity to get those guys some extra playing time, which is huge, and it's going on all around the country. And the pundits are saying that Penn State isn't necessarily deserving of the number 4 ranking, another 6, what would be 6 seed, in the college football playoff. And I think when you look at it, right, 4 of the top 5 teams are in the Big Ten. So you have to take that into your mind whenever you're talking about that. Obviously, the 2 best losses on the board right now are Ohio State losing to Oregon and Penn State losing to Ohio State. Texas, when they got beat by Georgia, they got beat by 15 points. Now, Georgia has since lost twice. And in those moments, Georgia just got smacked by Ole Miss by 18 points. And then they also lost to Alabama, to set by 7. Obviously, that was, not necessarily a bad loss at the time because Alabama and Georgia were in the top 4 of the country. But you just got beat by Ole Miss by 18, and your team hasn't played overly well of late. You struggled mightily against against Florida. You struggled against Mississippi State as well. And then you look at a team like BYU. BYU is undefeated, but the Big 12, after watching the Big 12, is not good. They beat Utah in a game that they probably should have lost that game. They thumped UCF. They barely beat Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State is not good. They thumped your beloved Arizona. They beat Baylor by 6.
Awful this year. Man,
Yeah.
Arizona, how the mighty have fallen.
They dismantled an overranked Kansas State team. And then obviously they thumped Wyoming. They won by 3 against SMU and beat Southern Illinois. Now, that SMU loss, I think SMU is going to be the ACC champion. They are my favorite team in the ACC to watch and to play. I think they can beat Miami. Miami is not great whatsoever. They lost 5 spots after losing to Georgia Tech, which I did tell you, watch out for Georgia Tech last week. Called that one, right? So, that was ugly. You've got Notre Dame hanging around the chicken coop, but they don't have a chance to be in the top 4. They might get a chance to host a home playoff game. You've also got Tennessee, who's got a tough schedule coming up. You've got Georgia this week, UTEP in the bye week for the SEC, and then they've got Vandy, which is a tough place as far as that goes. But going back to Penn State, they're unlike some of those SEC teams like Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia. They have lost only 1 game. Do they deserve to be number 4? I think that's up for debate. Indiana, for as good and as of a story as that is, it's the same deal as BYU. They have not played anybody. They beat Michigan. They barely beat Michigan. They thumped Michigan State. They beat Washington by 14. Obviously, common opponent, right? Penn State thumped Washington. They dismantled Nebraska. They thumped Northwestern. They beat Maryland by 14. They thumped Charlotte and UCLA and Western Illinois and Florida International. So, you look at that strength of schedule, and it's just not good. And that's where we're at in college football. But the biggest thing that Penn State keeps doing that some of these other teams don't do, like the Miamis, like the LSUs of the world, they keep winning.
Yeah, they certainly do. And Indiana's big test is in 2 weeks, right? Because they get the chance to play the number 4 Ohio State Buckeyes. They get to put that 104th or 100 whatever ranked strength of schedule to the test of do do you deserve the number 5 ranking? So, and I think the committee plays a part in it. They know this ranking doesn't matter, but they want the story. And it gets people talking about the ESPN poll, because the ESPN poll doesn't really matter, because both Penn State and Indiana are hosting playoff games right now in the predicted brackets. So, yeah, it'll all sort itself out. I'm excited for it. Excuse me. If you're Penn State, you're sitting pretty. You've all but locked up the 6th seed, because unless Ohio State gets revenge, well, yeah, even if Ohio State gets revenge on Oregon, Oregon's going to be the number 5 seed. So Penn State seemingly is just going to have the number 6 seed, and they're going to get whoever is number 11. Right now, it'd be Ole Miss, and that seems fantastic. Like, Ole Miss, welcome back to a bowl game. Let's come to Happy Valley this time. Let's make you play in the cold weather on December 21st, probably in a night game in a big environment, and we'll see if we get it. And this time, hopefully Penn State has their whole roster and they don't lose their 2 starting cornerbacks and whoever else didn't play in the bowl game last year. So pretty excited. Just win out and you're good to go. And yeah, it's what a time to be in college football. I think the nightmare for Penn State is Indiana beats Ohio State and then goes on and wins the Big Ten. That is the nightmare scenario for Penn State. It's very unlikely, but that puts Penn State as the 4th ranked Big Ten team, and that may push them to not host a game at Beaver Stadium.
Yeah, I think that's a nightmare scenario for the Big Ten too, because I think you look at the odd men out, and the way that I think this is going to break down is, I think there are going to be 4 Big Ten teams, depending on what Indiana does. And Indiana's got to bye this week. Then they play against Ohio State, and then they play Purdue. So that is, to me, the ultimate trap, that Purdue game. Because say you go out and you thump Ohio State, all right, or maybe not thump, but you beat Ohio State. The adrenaline off of that. Then you come back and you got to play Purdue, and that's tough. You go out and you lose against Ohio State, knowing that necessarily the Big Ten championship hopes are gone, and then you've got Purdue, and it's just that's not a great spot. But at least Purdue is not where Purdue has been in the past. So I think there are going to be 4 ACC or 4 Big Ten teams. I think there are also going to be 3 or 4, not ACC, but SEC teams, and that's going to constitute. I think, Texas is going to be up there as long as they don't lose. I think Ole Miss is in there as long as they don't lose. Alabama is going to be in there as long as they don't lose. And then it's a toss-up between Tennessee and Georgia. Because I think, when you look at the grand scheme of things and you look at kind of the body of work, Tennessee is kind of hanging around that chicken coop. When things don't get easier, to me, this weekend is for the playoff. For Tennessee and Georgia.
If you're Alabama, I think you root for Tennessee.
Oh, 100%.
Because you don't want to go play Texas in the SEC title game and risk a 3rd loss. Even if it is to Texas, you don't want to end the season on a loss. You want Tennessee to beat Georgia. That knocks Georgia out, so you have no one to potentially come from behind and jump you. Ole Miss is going to be there, but if Georgia's out of the question, you're good. And then Tennessee goes and gets beat by Texas. They get a 2nd loss. Alabama was what they didn't play Texas. So the SEC the conferences are way too big. I can't keep track of who plays who. But yeah, I don't think if you're Alabama, you even want to risk having to go play Texas in the SEC title game. Bit of a home field advantage because you get to play in Atlanta, which is a lot closer to Tuscaloosa than it is Austin. But
and I think that's the other thing too. You look at Alabama here to wrap up the season. They got Oklahoma and Auburn. I mean, Alabama's in a really good spot. But the problem is, if there's a 3-loss team before the conference champion, then I just don't see how they get in, because then you're rewarding teams for losing. And when you have undefeated teams like BYU I think is going to be the Big 12 champion. So to me, before we go into the third segment, I think the top four are going to be Oregon,
Texas,
BYU, and SMU. The odd men out are going to be the guys in the ACC and the Big 12 because I think there are one bid leagues. So that leaves two at large. That leaves the at large and my beloved Boise State and then Notre Dame.
If Miami loses to SMU, Boise State jumps them. Does Miami have to play Ohio State as the 12 seed? Like, is Miami a decent enough with 2 losses that they get in at 12 if Georgia's got 3 losses? If you're Miami, you better hope you win the ACC so you at least get the bye. So you only have to play Ohio State in the second round. Can you imagine just how bad that Miami loss would be to Ohio State in Columbus as the 12 seed?
Right.
Oh, I mean, it'd be awesome to see Canes
or
fans cry,
they end up at Penn State as the 11th seed, which could happen as well.
Yeah,
and I think that's kind of the thing to worry about for Miami. They can't slip up again. They have they're off this week, and then they've got Wake Forest and Syracuse. But they, depending on how that ACC championship goes, they could see themselves not even make the playoff.
Yeah. But if
Because
they do, it sounds like they're going to get Penn State, Ohio State. Like, that's a nightmare scenario for Miami.
Yeah. Yes, and having to go there. Because, I mean, you look at their schedule. They beat Florida, Florida A&M, Ball State, South Florida, Vautech. They won by 4. Probably should have lost. Beat Cal by 1. Probably should have lost. Louisville, Florida State, Duke, and then they got beat by Georgia Tech, and they got the Demon Deacons, and then the Orange. So, I mean, there's so much that can happen still, but we're going to talk a little bit more about the rest of the weekend when we come back for the third and final segment of the Lasching Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. Welcome back to the third and final segment of the Lasching Out Podcast, the Nittany Sports Now Network. I'm Jared. He's Kevin. Kevin, prediction for Penn State, first and foremost.
It's got to be at least 42-0, I think. So it'd be, again, 28.5 point spread. So they'll beat I'd get them against the spread. That over-under is lofty. 50.5 from a team that should get shut out or maybe scores once. 50.5 is a lot to me on the over-under. So, yeah, let's go 42-0 on that one.
I'm going to go 56-0 because this has to be a statement game. You have to go out and handle your stuff, and it's just going to be one of those things. You got to come out and handle your business. You got to win big. You got to dominate. You got to do everything you need to do, like the other teams, like the Oregons, the Ohio States, the Notre Dames, because those are the teams you're being compared to now, right? Notre Dame is in no man's land in that independent, but they always play a tough schedule. So
I just don't see Penn State with starters all game long, pedal to the metal, only because it doesn't matter. Like, if you're up 42-0, if you win 42-0 or 56-0, it doesn't matter. But you're probably coming out of the game healthier if it's 42 and Bo Perbula in the second string offensive line plays the entire fourth quarter and not Drew and Katron. That's
the other thing too, is that Drew, not only can Drew score, but so can Bo.
Yeah.
And they've been known to score with Bo. And that's kind of one of those things. You need them to score more points. But it'll be interesting to see kind of how the rest of the league, the rest of the country handles everything this week. Obviously, my beloved Boise State Broncos are on the road at San Jose State. Ashton Jeanty is still doing his thing. The teams are trying to key on him and stop him, but he's making it work. The Buckeyes are at Wrigley Field. Texas is at Arkansas. Utah is at Colorado.
Did you see Ohio State melting out about another noon kickoff? That was fun.
Yeah.
That was funny.
I don't have enough brain cells to argue about big noon kickoff at the moment because I have a lot of thoughts on it. And this goes into talking about the Chicago Bears and Kevin Warren, where things aren't going very well for them either. But that's for another podcast. We spent a little bit too much time on talking about where Penn State should be ranked. Clemson is at Pitt.
Pitt just
Tulane.
lost their second game last week to Virginia. Tough scene. Love to see it for Pitt. The game that's really caught my eyes, just scrolling these games, Missouri is on the road at South Carolina. South Carolina's 21, Missouri's 23. South Carolina is a 13.5-point favorite over the Tigers of Missouri. I think we have the rankings wrong if South Carolina is a nearly 2-touchdown favorite.
They're home and they're tough to play at South Carolina.
I know, but 21-23 should not be a 13.5-point favorite, no matter the rank. Like, no matter who it is, it should not be a 13.5-point game.
This goes back to what rankings do you think are valid, right? Those preseason rankings that seemingly are absolutely crap, right? The game of the week to me is Tennessee, Georgia. That's essentially for the 4th spot in the college football playoff for the SEC. And then everything else is just kind of normal. Oregon's got to come to Wisconsin. Boston College, SMU. Boston College benched their quarterback and he entered the portal. Again, that's another topic for a longer podcast. That it is what it is. But SMU, I spent the weekend in Dallas. Like I mentioned, I went to TCU. I really wanted to go to SMU, but they had a bye. So, but everything's all about SMU now down there, and it's great. And you've got so many different colleges right there. You've got SMU, you've got TCU, you've got Texas Tech in Lubbock, you've got Baylor and Waco, and you've got all kinds of college football down there, and it's crazy. Texas and Austin, and in College Station, you got Texas A&M, and they're all pretty spread out. Obviously, TCU and SMU are pretty close. But man, they're all about it. You walk into the Dallas Love Field Airport, you see SMU. Rhett Lashley is doing a great job there. So they're my pick to win the ACC. I think they're the dark horse. But right now, they're the best team in play in Dallas, which is not hard because the Cowboys are absolutely awful.
Yeah, Washington State, sneaky, now 8-1, leading the Pac-12 of 2. And then the last game, we're talking about rankings and terrible spreads. The mighty BYU at home, night game against Kansas, 10-15 kick on ESPN, only a 2.5-point game. Like, college football is so messed up, man, and I love it. Like, number 6 team against unranked Kansas, even though Kansas just beat Iowa State. They're 3-6, and that's a 2.5-point game. So kind of just shows like the Big 12 is just a bunch of bottom dwellers at this point in time. It's kind of what happens when your 2 best programs leave and go to the SEC. So, yeah.
And that's college football. It's college football in a nutshell. And that's crazy because, you kind of look at everything as the season has gone on. And the Big 12, I think whoever does win that, if it's BYU, they're going to be underdogs in their playoff game.
It could very well be they play Colorado in the Big 12 title game. So, one last thing, because we're at the end of the show, 40 minutes in, and I almost forgot. This show is brought to you by Good Dog Beverage Company. Good Dog offers a variety of products, including zero-carb, zero-sugar vodka cocktails and bourbon hard seltzers. Also, whiskey cocktails that only have 3 grams of carbs and 3 grams of sugar. Their Good Dogs leverage the beverage program. They donate a portion of the profits from each case sold and 100% of the merchandise sales profits to provide service dogs for people in need. You can go to gooddogbeverage.com. That's good, DOGG beverage.com to find merchandise and the closest retailer carrying Good Dog beverages to you.
Any parting shots, Kevin, before we say goodbye?
Yeah, We're talking about the rivalry that's not the rivalry with the University of Maryland. I've got to say Maryland might be the worst state on the planet. There are a lot of states high up on that ranking. Driving through Maryland, I think I only slept 2 hours after the Penn State game. Got to my hotel at 3. Was on the road by 5:30. Watched the sunrise come up over the mountains in Bedford, Pennsylvania. It was awesome. Saw nobody on I-70 for 30 miles. I think I passed one car in 30 miles. And then I get to Maryland, and there's a dude doing 40 in the left lane, absolutely loitering, causing all sorts of traffic. And then you got that one random dude doing 100 miles an hour in the right lane. And it's just like, what are we doing, folks? No one in Maryland knows how to drive. There's 4 lanes. No one's in the right lane. And then you're like, hey, man, like, I could use some breakfast. I could use some gasoline. And then you look on the sign. It's like, oh, yeah, like, you can grab a McDonald's breakfast sandwich and you get some gas at Shell. Oh, by the way, that gas station is 6 miles off the freaking highway, and it's going to be a 30-minute detour. Like, Maryland sucks. It's if I never have to drive through Maryland ever again, it would be too soon. Like, just, it's terrible. Maryland, you need to do better. I had a lot of windshield time, man, and I was thinking about this parting shot. This thing's been brewing for 4 days because Maryland sucks that much.
You need to go slurp down a good dog seltzer and calm yourself.
We're back on YouTube this week, too. I finally went out and bought an Ethernet cable.
That's right. No glitches, blemishes. You'll get to see our faces on wherever you would like to see it. YouTube. You can imagine our faces if you're listening, wherever you listen to your podcast. For Kevin Quigley, this has been Jared Pergar. We'll catch you again after Penn State's game against Purdue. Thanks, as always, for joining us on the Lasching Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. We'll catch you again next week.